How do we scale AI, and what are some of the barriers that we need to address? So if you look across the organizations that have done this really successfully, what sets them apart?
I think for the first part of your question, in terms of what needs to be done, there are three key things that we see as absolutely necessary. One is obviously accelerating private sector adoption of technology and making sure that we're closing that gap. Part of closing that gap includes making sure that individuals have the digital skills necessary to be able to not only understand what AI is and isn't, but also what it means to develop and deploy it responsibly. So it really starts with empowering the workforce to understand what this technology is and how it can help them. I'll just share a quick anecdote on that. I was talking with a chief data scientist of a very large legacy organization. And she was explaining to me that this organization was very slow in adopting AI and very reticent in terms of what it represented. And I asked her, well, how did you do it? Because you did it and it works and it's scaled. And she said, Sasha, it's very simple. I sat down with 3,000 employees for half an hour each in this organization, and I asked them what they hated the most about their job. And then I used AI to automate it. And so it was an incredible example of how we really need to start with people in terms of buying into that organizational transformation. And it goes for private sector adoption, like for public sector adoption, where a lot of legacy institutions exist. So closing that gap and empowering the workforce to understand what this opportunity represents is something that's really important. So private sector adoption and accelerating that, first point. Second aspect is really looking at how to modernize public sector adoption of AI and accelerate it. I talked a little bit earlier about how public sector adoption inspires trust, but beyond inspiring trust, public sector adoption can actually help the government deliver on what is their most fundamental mission, which is to deliver value and become closer to citizens. So my 96-year-old father, who does not understand email, does not understand video streaming, is using a generative AI chatbot to access his Social Security benefits. If you ask my 96-year-old father to understand the Social Security website of the government, he would be completely lost. And so it really represents an opportunity to accelerate what fundamentally is the mission of government, which is to unlock benefits for society more broadly. And we see that in, for example, the UK, the ways in which the NHS is adopting AI to help do triage in their emergency rooms. And this is just one of many examples of the ways in which really it can unlock not only value, but again, the beneficial use across government. So modernizing public sector technology is absolutely essential. And then the third element that we see is really important is the question of pro-innovation environments. I think right now, one of the biggest blockers to AI adoption is the lack of trust in the technology. And so really making sure that we're addressing that trust and helping citizens and governments around the world understand that actually responsibility and innovation are not opposites. They need to go hand in hand because responsibility drives the trust necessary, which will drive adoption, which will unlock innovation for all. And so convening conversations about what a pro-innovation environment actually looks like, where governments talk with academics, who talk with engineers, who talk with industry leaders about what are the risks that we need to address, what are the most technically feasible ways that in the state of the art of a technology that realistically, Bernard, outpaces any regulatory environment that exists in the world. How can we make sure that we're using state-of-the-art technology to really address those risks and convene those conversations that are absolutely essential so that we have a shared vocabulary of what risk is and how to best address it in this technology so that responsibility and innovation can go hand in hand?
Amazing. I love those examples. How about you, Alex?
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is if I can make a comparison to railways and steam engines. Right now, we're hyper-focused on models, benchmarks, and this model is better than that model, and this model is newer than this model. But companies in general, from my experience, they don't really buy models. They want solutions. And so if we want AI to be adopted more broadly, both in the public and the private sector, I think we need to focus just as much on the companies that are building solutions, not just on the companies that are building models. So to make a comparison with engines and railways, we were focused on whose engine is bigger than what engine is bigger than other engine, but without a railway for that engine to sort of go, just building a bigger engine is not necessarily the most interesting thing. And so for us, we're very much an applied AI company. We train our models as well when we need to, but we see ourselves as a video platform that really tries to deliver solutions to organizations that want to adopt AI. So, and I think that's how we're now the world's largest AI video platform for enterprise. And, companies are not making Hollywood movies in Synthesia. When you say AI video, you probably immediately think of, film entertainment. No, companies are making corporate videos. They're making employee training videos, customer support, sales enablement, that type of content. But you wouldn't necessarily think that type of content would create a sizable market, but actually we're not displacing video, we're displacing text. So the companies that are making AI video in Synthesia, they're replacing presentations, they're replacing Word documents, they're not replacing sort of necessarily traditional video. And if you think of these kind of large organizations, a lot of times, they communicate as if we're still in the 1990s. And with video, they can sort of join the 21st century. And that's been, I think that's been a really powerful way and really useful way of adopting AI, is thinking about what are the problems we're trying to solve and kind of working backwards to the solutions and then eventually the models that are needed for those solutions. That's how we think about it.
I think it's a really important point. I think the organizations that really succeed with the AI are the ones that are stepping back and saying, okay, how is it actually completely potentially transforming the way I deliver value to my customers and how I do business? And I still feel there's so many organizations stuck in, let's try to automate what we already have. Let's try to drive efficiency instead of stepping back. Do you see that too?
I love your articulation of that, Bernard, because I think the question is really, how do we move beyond productivity and efficiency gains and really look at how can AI actually help us reimagine how we deliver value? But in parallel to that, how can we make sure that we don't get stuck in a kind of POC purgatory where there's lots of proof of concepts that aren't scaled? And I think right now, one of the things that's really essential is how can we learn from each other about what's working and what's not working? And how can we scale what works? I think right now what's exciting is that the technology is developing so quickly. How can we make sure that we're learning in this experimentation and scaling those learnings across industries? And Alex, I also loved your articulation, because one of the fundamental things that we're seeing, and the author Jeffrey Ding really highlights this, is that the kind of long-term winners in technological revolutions across time are not the companies or governments that have the eureka moment where they develop the most powerful model or the most powerful X, but they are the organizations and governments that mainstream the adoption of this technology across their economies. So that's where the value really exists, is how do we make sure that we're closing that gap between AI innovation, which is an angle like this, and AI adoption, which is more of an angle like that, not only through closing this two-tier economy on those three levels, but also making sure that the policy gaps that exist that reinforce that gap are addressed most effectively.
So when you look across your customer base, the ones that are able to scale your solution and the ones that maybe get stuck in the pilot phase for too long, what's the difference?
That's a very good question. I think one of the things about our platform is that it delivers real value. And the thing we've noticed is that the more you onboard more employees to use it, they discover themselves use cases for the platform. So to give you an example, we have customers who initially adopted for internal communications and employee training. And so they'll make videos on Synthesia in which they, have a health and safety policy or a data privacy policy that they need to train everyone in the organization to follow. But because everyone in the organization has to watch that content, it's in some cases, you need to be regulatory compliant, and it's a good sort of governance principle to be trained on these issues. As they're watching the video, they have not only are obviously they're learning through the video, but they have an aha moment. Is like, wait a minute, I can actually use this. I'm in sales or I'm in marketing. Why can I use this to communicate to my customers?